Welcome to Freeze Your Milk Podcast. I'm your host, Bridget, along with my husband, Chris. Podcast where we talk about the comedic side and serious side of parenting, life, and relationships. We are boy parents. We have two boys, Enzo and Rhett, with about a 6-year age gap between the two. You can check out our website, freezeyourmilk.com. Also, feel free to follow us on Instagram at Freeze Your Milk Podcast. Thanks and hope you enjoy. Welcome back, everybody.
Hey. Another solid week behind us.
I feel like I should apologize now for sounding super congested. Allergies are so bad right now.
Yeah, you and Enzo get really bad.
Yeah. It hit out of nowhere yesterday. I'm like, oh my gosh, my sinuses.
I don't think anybody's used to Arizona.
No.
No one's meant to live here.
Not at all. Well, today is part 2 of our little 3-part mini-series. Part 1 was last week, which was my childhood and 20s. Part 2 is this week, which is going to be your childhood and 20s. And then part 3 will be next week, and it's about everything kind of we've gone through as a couple.
Yeah. Which has been a lot.
It has. It has. So, we talk a lot about in previous episodes of the podcast how we want to be better and different parents to our kids than our parents were to us. So growing up for you as a kid, what was it like, when you would get home from school, or if you were homesick, or what was it like for you with your parents?
Let me set the stage here. As a 1.5-year-old baby, I broke my femur. That should tell you pretty much everything you need to know about my childhood.
I mean, Rhett's crazy, so I would not put it past him to break his femur at 1.5.
No, all kidding aside, my childhood, it was funny because I was like, my childhood was kind of normal, and you laughed about it, and you're like, your childhood was not normal. I guess it was normal to me. It was my norm. Growing up, my dad was in construction. My mom was in she was in finance, so corporate America. I would say middle class, suburbs, family.
You're probably middle upper, I'd say.
Middle upper, yeah. I mean, my parents weren't poor by any means.
Yeah.
They had decent money. We took vacations and stuff, but I would say what I remembered the most from my younger years is the absence of my mother. Uh-huh. And her not being around. She made work a priority. And you can even ask her this to today, why did you work? Why did you make that a priority? She says, well, she had to do it for the family, and maybe part of that's true. But I really don't think that it was. She made her friends priority. She made her extracurriculars like tennis priorities.
Happy hour with coworkers.
Yeah, happy hours with coworkers and client meetings and stuff like that. She made that the priority while my dad was essentially home with us on the day-to-day, trying to take care of us. But he was an extremely angry person. He was a very depressed person. He's always suffered from depression, anger. So he was in construction, so his days were early. He'd start work at 4 a.m. So he was always gone in the mornings, and then I'd see him when I got home from school because he'd get off at 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and by then he would be sleeping. But I remember something that me and my sisters used to do when we had to wake him up. We would literally draw straws because we were so terrified to wake him up from a nap. And, the more that I think about it, that was just the normal then. Yeah. But now that I think about that.
And as a dad yourself.
As a dad, I'm like, wow, if my kids ever get to a place where they're terrified to wake me up, then there's an issue, Yeah. I mean, my dad did the best he could with who he was, and I commend him for sticking it out as long as he possibly could. He didn't take off on us. He didn't,
He didn't get the help he needed.
He didn't get the help he needed because I don't think he knew how to get that help.
Yeah.
And my mom, like I said, made it a point to
Prioritize other things because of, the way he was. She didn't want to be there. And I think I need to say that, my parents didn't necessarily marry for love. Actually, they didn't. I'll just, come out with that one. They didn't marry for love. They were roommates. My mom had owned a house that she bought with another gentleman. He essentially, this other gentleman told her that he could help her fix it up and turn it into an investment property, et cetera, et cetera. Come to find out, this guy has no background in this, has no idea what he's doing. So here she is with this house that needs a lot of work. My dad needed somewhere to live. So through friends, ended up, becoming roommates. And my dad helped her remodel this house, essentially. Yeah. And they were roommates, they slept in separate rooms. It was not relationship type.
No, but I guess obviously one thing led to another, and
they were pregnant.
My mom was pregnant with my sister.
Yeah.
Oops. My oldest sister. And after that, they were kind of, in a way, they were old fashioned, I guess. So they decided, hey, we have a baby. Guess we should get married. Do that whole deal. My dad he had just gotten out of the military, or he had been out of the military, but he used his VA, or he used something he got from the military to help my mom remodel this house. So that was kind of his investment towards it. Long story short is that,
it was never for love.
No, it was never for love. It was just simply, oh, shit, we're pregnant. Got to do the right thing. Then they had my sister Vanessa. Then my mom really wanted a son. A couple years later had me. And, the rest of that is kind of history, but...
It's so interesting to me that she really wanted, additional children, because she's...
Not the children type.
No, she's not motherly.
She's not nurturing by any means. Anytime I got hurt sick, I didn't go to her. I'd go to my dad.
Yeah.
And he wasn't exactly the most nurturing soul either.
If you were home from school sick, or you got sent home sick, this is a good example. What happened?
They'd call my dad.
And what'd your dad do?
He'd either come get me out of school.
And then go back to work.
Yeah, they'd leave me home.
Because I remember you telling me you were alone a lot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Of your childhood.
Yeah, my dad didn't, being construction, he didn't get time off.
Yep.
My mom, she did.
But she had meetings.
And she had more important shit to do than to be there with her sick kid. So that was normal, though. I mean, that was the way it was, And so we got very used to being alone.
And fending for yourselves.
And fending for ourselves. I spent the majority of my kid years outside with friends and, playing basketball, sports, or skating, or skateboarding, or biking, or riding go-peds, or go-karts, or whatever the case may be. I was always outside. I'd come home. I'd leave from school, drop off my bag. I was gone out the door doing God knows what, with my friends. And then I'd come home 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, eat dinner, go to bed. My mom was not there. My dad was there, but he wasn't there. He was the one that would help us with homework and stuff like that when we needed it. But I always felt like it was kind of begrudgingly. He felt obligated to do it, obviously, because my mom wasn't there. So more or less, it was kind of a rough, upbringing. It didn't give me any real sense of security or direction, You
said that you got to go on vacations a lot as a family, growing up.
We got to go on mom's vacations.
I was going to say, like, elaborate on that, because I think last week, if I remember correctly, we talked a little bit about how we would go on vacation, but my mom would check out from being a parent when we were on vacation.
Yeah. So that was one thing we would do. We would go on vacations, whether it be ski trips or go to the beach or something like that. But the way that my mom would set it all up was for her. So anywhere we went, it had to have a golf course. It had to have a tennis court. A lot of times her friends would tag along. I remember they used to rent a beach house out in Morro Bay, which we went several times to. But again, it had hiking trails. It had everything that my mom wanted to do. It wasn't necessarily for the kids.
Yeah.
It was mom's vacation. We're just along for the ride kind of thing.
With your dad as a babysitter?
With my dad as essentially the babysitter.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Or you guys were left to your own devices.
Or we were left on our own to do, whatever we needed to do to survive. So vacations were pretty much organized around my mom and what she wanted, not everybody else. I remember my dad used to fight with her all the time on vacations because it was always shit she wanted to do. It wasn't what he wanted.
Yeah.
But again, he wanted to be in a cabin in the middle of the woods with no reception, no TVs, just wilderness, and nothing else around him. So, I mean, I get
He's
that.
A recluse.
He is very much a recluse.
Yeah.
And he's an introvert. He just, still to this day, mine and his relationship's not great. He's never met my son.
What do you feel like, so we talked about last week some of the defining moments of me and my parents that shaped our relationship. So with your dad, I know I can name 2 or 3 that I've heard, but what do you feel like were defining moments that led to how your relationship evolved and led to you guys not really being close?
Yeah, I think it all kind of really started when I was about 13. My parents divorced at 13, when I was 13, because my mom, essentially, she cheated on my father.
That was a defining moment for your relationship with your mom, because...
Yes, it was.
You want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much just cast her out after that. She decided to...
You and her were out of town.
Yeah, she took me for another one of our trips. It was just me, with one of her friends, to go skiing for my birthday. And she had taken a friend with her who was male, and she ended up sleeping with him while I was there, when I was 13 years old.
And you found out about it.
And I found out about it. It turned into a pretty big deal. I had talked to my dad several times about this situation, and the only thing that he could tell me when they were going through all this was that he had already known that she was unfaithful, and he didn't really care.
Depression talking.
Yeah, I mean, he just was like, whatever, and went about his business. My parents ended up living together for like a year while they were going through a divorce, while my dad was trying to figure out, they had just bought, they had built a big house, and, finances are finances, so they were trying to figure out sort that out, get the divorce finalized, etc. I remember they asked me who I wanted to live with. I said my dad. In hindsight, that probably was not a great choice. But the alternative was my mom.
And at that point, you were very mad because of what had recently happened.
Yeah, at that point, I was too furious with her. I pretty much turned my back on her.
Yeah.
And that was history. Like, we just stopped communicating. There was no real relationship there. It was just dead.
You, in that moment, I feel like what you're saying is that it defined your relationship with her, because I think that was the moment that was a big core memory of selfishness.
Yes. Agreed.
And I think that turned the tide of the relationship. It wasn't great to begin with because she was never a super motherly type person, but I feel like that was a turning point for you to really view her as she's an extremely selfish, self-interested person.
Yeah, absolutely. I never really got the loving feeling from her.
Yeah.
I never like, if somebody said love, I would not associate it with my mother. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And she, again, like my dad, they both had their challenges. Their upbringings were not decent at all. They weren't great. So they are who they are. I'd say for my dad, though.
So you chose to live with him?
Yeah, I chose to live with him. And I think that I got into a lot of trouble in high school. As soon as I got into high school, I started acting out really bad. I was mean. I was vocal. Anytime I talked to my mom, I was just very disrespectful, even though, I was so upset with her. I just had a lot of anger. I was very rude to her. I, said shit that no son should ever say to his mother, just because I was so pissed off. I got in a lot of trouble in school, fighting, getting suspended, and
got in trouble with the cops.
I got in trouble with the cops constantly. I was always out partying with my friends and just getting into trouble, getting detained in my front yard, cops showing up at the house in the middle of the night. The whole.
Looking back, do you see that it was a temper tantrum, kind of about the divorce and everything that
absolutely.
I
was absolutely acting out.
Yeah.
Trying to be heard, and no one heard me, kind of thing. So I got in a lot of trouble. Barely made it, through school. It wasn't until, I'd say probably my senior year, that me and my dad had gotten in a pretty gnarly fight, and essentially we kind of beat the shit, hit each other, and he said some shit, and we didn't like it. I got in trouble, he got in trouble, it just was no good. It was just not a really good situation.
Both people were swinging fists.
Yeah, it wasn't good. So I actually ended up moving in with my mom. It wasn't until my senior year that I really tried to turn it around academically, and was trying to be better, be a better person. And even then it was extremely difficult. But I had graduated and moved out, got an apartment, just couldn't be with my parents anymore.
In the
toxicity. So I moved out, and I think that's when it all kind of started to spiral for me, because I really didn't have the structure of school anymore. I was enrolled, obviously, in my undergraduate stuff for college, and was going to community colleges and stuff like that, but I didn't really have the structure of high school anymore. And I had an apartment with a friend, and we partied, and then I got hooked on drugs. I got hooked on drugs. Was working full time, doing the deal, being 20, 22, or 21, 22, partying it up and living my best life. And I think it was around 23, I was probably 22 or 23. I got hurt at work, hurt my back pretty bad. Went and saw a doctor, and he put me on painkillers. And that was pretty much it. It really just went downhill from there pretty quickly. So I actually had a pretty long...
7 years of your life?
Yeah, I had a pretty long... I had to have been like 22, because, I had a pretty long addiction to opiates. Should have died a couple times. And it took a while, but I went through my ups and downs, went through my lows, my real lows, lost my job, and wasn't doing well. But I ended up...
Your dad moved back in with you?
Yeah, my
dad.
You
bought a house at that point?
Yeah, I had bought a house.
Before you lost your job?
But before I lost my job. My dad had moved back in with me to kind of try and help me. But he quickly realized he couldn't do it. So he took off, kind of forced me to sell my house. I sold my house, and they put me in kind of a
rough position with that because, I worked really hard to buy that house and I had some decent equity in the property.
You bought when the market was down?
Yeah, I bought it when, right when the 2008, 2009 market crashed, and picked it up for cheap and sold it for a lot more. And they ended up essentially forcing me to sign the money over to my mom, which kind of really put a ripple between us.
And on your dad, too, for your dad.
Yeah, I mean, them forcing me into that and her not setting that aside for me. Instead, she used it for her own personal gain. Was extremely frustrating. And I just felt taken advantage of by my own parents. Granted, I wasn't a great human being, but at the same time, but it literally, I ended up it really took me, I don't know, I was in that addiction for about 8 years.
Yeah.
8-9 years, something like that. And I ended up rolling my truck on the freeway. Thank God no one got injured.
Yeah.
I ended up in a cell for a night, and I decided that it was time to turn my life around. I couldn't do it anymore. Enough was enough, and I ended up going into basically the middle of the desert. It was a Christian discipleship program. Essentially, it was a rehab for almost 2 years to get my mind right and to get healthy and to turn everything around. And thank God I did, because who knows where I'd be now,
Let's talk a little bit. We talk a lot about, we always use the phrase, they've already written the book. People have already written the book. The book's been written and decided. Elaborate a little bit more about when we're talking about that, about you, about your two sisters. What was that growing up to where it is now?
Yeah, so my oldest sister, very left-brained, very artistic, very unique individual. She was kind of a rebel, and she got in a lot of trouble. She did things differently, too, as well. Me and her had a better relationship than my relationship with my middle sister. My middle sister was the golden child. She could do no wrong.
She was the star student, star athlete.
Yep. And she got good grades. She was the one that got the scholarship. And
it's so interesting when you think about how, your acting out and seeking attention was like a temper tantrum to the divorce. I feel like her being the goody two shoes and being she was in her own way equally having a temper tantrum, but in the sense of, instead of acting out, I'm going to be absolutely amazing at everything. They have to notice me then.
Yep.
And I have to be worthy of attention.
And then my oldest sister just kind of disappeared. She bounced from city to city, relationship to relationship. I don't know what she was doing, to be honest with you.
She lived the longest with the bad example of what a relationship's supposed to be.
Yeah, and she just went through countless horrible relationships, and she was constantly moving from one place to another.
So the book. So you were...
Yeah.
The book was written early on. And what was that book for you?
That book was that...
What did your parents make up their mind, and that's what it was?
That my oldest sister was who she was. She would probably be okay.
The middle sister.
But my middle sister was perfect. She could do no wrong. She was the golden child, and then when she had children, it was just, oh my gosh,
golden
grandchildren and all that. Me, I was going to die.
Yep.
Essentially. I was either going to end up in prison or a casket. And I think they both tried, their best to come to terms with that, because they were just waiting on that phone call. And I think that's kind of what helped propel me.
To prove them wrong.
And if you ask about it now, if you see our lives now and my sister's lives, my oldest sister is doing pretty well. She is married, has 2 kids. My dad actually lives with her. She does really well. She's good. My middle sister actually passed away 2 years ago from an OD. So she OD'd. And, we are here
on a podcast, doing our thing and with our two beautiful kids, and we got another one on the way, and I'm still fighting, I'm still fighting. And a lot of it, I think part of me is still trying to prove them wrong in a way. I don't want to say that because, I went through 2 years of intense therapy and, a completely eye-opening experience that basically says you don't have to do that. That's not what you should be trying to do, is prove people wrong, but a little bit of me's like, yeah, you guys had that book written and this was my story. That was the story that you guys had written for me, and I'm glad I got to prove you wrong.
I think it's hard so let's talk a little bit about, as a parent now, how much impact it has on how you act with the boys versus how your parents acted with you and your siblings.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I am very much now, even if I'm in a terrible mood, which or angry or upset or whatever, I'm very much, I want to be here with them. I want to at least be here. I think it's okay that they see me emotional sometimes, or angry or upset or sad, or, just struggling, and our jobs, our current jobs have made it easier for us to be home all the time, which is huge because honestly, I didn't want it any other way. I like to be able to see my son every day. And I think that's a huge thing to him because that was not something that I was familiar with.
Yeah.
I felt alone a lot as a child, and I don't want my kids to feel like that. Even if I'm kind of in a shitty mood, I at least I'm here.
Yep.
And, like I said, my dad was there, but he wasn't really there. He was very angry.
Very depressed.
Very depressed.
Depression is for the people that go through it, it's crippling, and it has ripples that affect everybody they interact with, unfortunately. And if you're, during that day and age, it wasn't common for men to be allowed to be depressed, and B, for them to be able to seek help for it.
Yeah, I mean, you're very much, hey,
depression's a woman thing.
You got feelings. You need to pack that way. Yeah, suck it up, pack it deep inside you, and keep moving forward.
Yeah,
that's what that was. And unfortunately, my dad never got to really recover from it or got the help that he ever needed.
Yeah,
and now my mom, like, she's depressed. Again, she lost her daughter. My dad lost his daughter and lost his other son, so it just spiraled for them, unfortunately, But.
So you get to be home a lot more, and that's important to you to, show up every day for the kids.
Yep.
What else do you feel like has been a huge impact on how you are with your kids in a, direct reaction from how your parents were with you?
Well, we were talking about it tonight. We were talking about the fact that I still struggle because I'm concerned that I'm going to end up similar to my father was with me. And that's one thing that, I'm constantly fighting is, turning into my dad for my kids. And you basically summed it up with breaking chains. You have to break those chains, and you have to start thinking differently.
I think we talked about, I'd said that, because your concern was that your kids were going to see you as negative all the time, or upset or angry or bitter all the time. And that's how you saw your dad.
Yeah.
And I said, sometimes it's easier, instead of saying, I want to change for me, I want to be a better person. I don't want to be, bitter, angry, or upset or whatever. Sometimes it's easier to say, I don't want my kids to see that, and so I have to change. And sometimes that allows that change to be driven more.
versus trying to do it for yourself, which
Like
sounds kind of bad.
It sounds bad because normally everyone's like, do everything for yourself, but sometimes it's easier to make it more of a priority to make that change happen and to be more conscious of it when you're thinking about, from my 1.5-year-old's point of view, how is this looking? From my 7.5-year-old's point of view, how is this looking? And how do I change that perception for them?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time. We're like, we really have no, like, as far as our families are concerned, we don't have a support system. Mm-hmm. Like, we do this on our own, or we have a wonderful nanny that helps us out that loves our child to death. You've got some friends that really care, and, my dad's not here. My mom is here, but she is pretty unreliable. I mean, we've requested some things from her, and she's told us that she would do it, and she just does flats out. She doesn't do it. It's not like she's still working. She's retired. So
no, but the things that were priorities in her life are still her priorities. Her social circle, her tennis, her golden grandchildren, like whatever previously was a priority is still a priority.
Yeah, and that's fine. But don't expect me to I guess feel differently about how I feel about it. I struggle with it. So, and now we've just kind of not made her a priority. So my relationship with her is not that strong. I mean, we communicate, but it's very, I want to say it's very one directional. It's hi, how are you? Good. How's the kids? Great. Okay. See ya.
We've talked a lot about, offline, off our podcast, about curating. It is our job as parents to curate as much as possible what we choose to allow in our kids' lives. Yep. And that has also come at we talked about with my parents, there's a whole episode about why we cut them off, and we touched a little bit about it last week, but with your parents too, like curating how much we allow them to be around our kids, because we know what the potential negative impacts could be. Mm-hmm. And there could be positive impacts, but we have to sit here and weigh out and say,
do the positive or do the negative outweigh the positive?
Yeah. Like, what do we feel like is the best for our kids?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember when we first started dating and Enzo was sick, and so I kept him home from daycare, and I called out of work, and you were shocked? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't something that I was used to.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. Yeah. He's in daycare. He can't fend for himself, but we did. I mean, I had 2 older sisters, so a lot of times they would be home too. One of them would be home too, or something. So
I think I was working from home at that point too, but you were still like so shocked that I was just like, hey, I'm taking the day. Like, I'm going to just snuggle with my kid and take care of him.
Make him feel better.
And, give him this time.
Yeah.
And I just remember you were so surprised by it.
Yeah. Because again, it was not something, my mom didn't just take days off because I was sick, I mean, every once in a while she'd come pick me up and take me home and drop me off and say I'm going back to work. There's, soup in the pantry. Heat up some soup, but... Yeah, I mean, I strictly remember a time I got pulled out of school because I had chicken pox. And she was going out of town. So she had to turn around and come get me. Mind you, I had chicken pox. She dropped me back off at home and she went out of town. That's who she is, or who she was then.
Yeah. What do you feel like in your 20s were some of the core interactions with your parents?
Not good. Not good at all. My 20s, I really, so I was trying to, by that time my dad kind of had given up on me. He moved in with my middle sister to help them. Mine and his relationship was not good at all. We fought a lot, so he got mad because I moved out, and he felt abandoned, I guess.
He used to threaten a lot of self-harm acts.
Yes,
too,
he did.
as a way of trying to like argue with you.
Yeah, and it just didn't set well with me. So I moved out at young age, and he didn't like that. Because, my mom did the same shit, and my sisters disappeared. But he ended up moving in with my sister to spend time with them, and we didn't have a good relationship. So I tried in my 20s to try and kind of reconcile with my mom, and we had a scheduled day of the week that we would grab dinner together. And
I don't think I ever knew that. That's why she was obsessed with eating dinner with you.
yeah.
I did not know that.
Every week, she would try to meet me for dinner. We'd always go to Chili's. Always Chili's. This is all coming back. This is all making sense. Like, this is very enlightening.
What was your aha moment just now?
I was like, well, because I always, think about Chili's. I'm like, it's not that I really love Chili's food, but I'm like, we should go to Chili's, And I now it's all making sense. I'm like, I used to go to fucking Chili's all the time. I'm like thinking about the fact that you're right. Every time she calls me, she's like, "Let's grab dinner," and I'm like,
and it's always just you.
Oh yeah, and me and her used to just sit down one-on-one and have dinner, and talk about things that were going on and whatever. But that was how we tried to reconcile our relationship.
That worked well.
Yeah, it didn't. But
was your family supportive of you choosing to go to rehab?
Yeah, I think so.
All of them?
Not all of them, no. My mother, yes. My dad,
indifferent.
He was indifferent. He was, he knew I needed it. My oldest sister, yes. My middle sister, no, because she was struggling with her own demons. She actually came to visit on a visitor's day and told me to get in the car. She's like, "Let's go." And I knew at that moment that that was going to be a defining moment for my life. And I told her no. I said, "You should go."
She was your get high buddy.
Yeah.
You were her get high buddy.
Yeah, we used to party together and all that. But yeah, she was the only one that wasn't really supportive of it. I think she was in her own right, but she struggled with her own stuff. And I think a lot of her issues were like, man, my little brother was such a fuck up. Now he's
she'd written the book.
Yeah, straight edge, and I'm the one with all the fucking problems.
Yeah.
And when she died, I was just kind of like, me and you knew. We knew when we got the call, we were like, yeah. Because I had been preaching to my family, like, hey, she's struggling, she needs help. We had offered help, and she just...
It's so crazy, because I think about that moment when we got the call. We were out of town, and the first thing that they had said was, Vanessa died. And instantly you and I both, and we talked about it later, you and I both were like, okay, what version of self-harm did this go? Mm-hmm. This was not, we're not going to hear she got, hit by a drunk driver. We're not going to hear that, some crazy mishap happened, a freak accident.
No,
we as soon as we heard, hey, Vanessa's dead, we knew.
Yeah, I kind of figured she probably had OD'd.
Yeah.
Because she had showed up to our house a couple weeks before.
Yeah.
And she was not in good shape. And,
You remember we told your mom about that?
Uh-huh. Yeah, we had I called her after she left. And I said, hey, you need to probably touch base with Vanessa. And
you remember what your mom said?
Something along the lines of let her hit her rock bottom. Yeah. I said, well, her rock bottom
might kill her.
And it did.
3 weeks later.
2 weeks later. So I know that's something that my parents are still recovering from. I'm in a different place from that. It didn't. My dad, he had that, and then 2 weeks later, his son,
your half brother,
my half brother, shot himself, and that's got to be a lot, Me and my dad have, ever since those incidents, me and him have not had a really good relationship at all. Mm-hmm. We haven't been talking.
It was hard too. For us, life had to go on. When that happened, we were 4 months pregnant?
Yep.
So life, whether we wanted it to or not, was going to keep moving.
Yeah, it wasn't just going to stop.
And that that put you on a very different timeline, and also having had years of knowing where your sister's headspace was and knowing that like this was a choice she's made and she's not wanting help on it, whereas your mom and your sister had more of a rose-colored view of her. But it put us on a very different timeline for processing through her death and the grief and everything else, because not even 6 months later, we had a newborn that was fully dependent on us being there and being checked in and not checked out.
Yeah, and it was a couple years prior to us in this incident that I was in rehab myself, and I went through a program with a success rate that wasn't very good, and I couldn't count how many people I went through with that left, and I found out that they died.
Yeah.
It was my life at the time. That's what I was dealing with. And, yes, this was a little bit closer to home because it was my sister. But the fact of the matter is I knew something was coming. And how do you help somebody that isn't, she doesn't admit that she has something going on, and B, she doesn't want your help.
Yeah.
There was nothing I could do.
Yep.
I tried to talk to her.
I think that was the hardest part for you.
It was very hard because I just came through this and I was like, man, like I extended an olive branch. I asked you to come in. I asked you to, I told her, I was like, hey, if you ever need to get away from Mike, just come stay here. Mm-hmm. Like her ex-husband or whatever he was. Just whatever you need. We had the conversations. She'd call me crying, and I'd be like, hey, I can get you into... I know the female version of what I just went through. If you want to go through it, let me know. We'll figure it out. But that was not... She wasn't about to do that.
No.
So, it was just... That was tough. That was what that anniversary was, what, 2 years ago, like a month, 30 days ago?
Yeah, in August.
Something like that.
2 years in August.
So.
Let's talk a little bit about your first roommate.
Oh, my drug dealer.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he wasn't in the beginning.
Former best friend.
Yeah, he wasn't. In the beginning, he was my best friend, and we went to high school together, lived together. We were roommates forever, and close. He would also sell me narcotics, and...
Then eventually opiates.
Yeah, and then opiates. Well, mainly just opiates, but it was a very toxic relationship. I don't want to talk too much about him necessarily because, again, I don't have the right to. But it was not a good, healthy place for me to be. And as soon as he figured out a way out, he took it. Which, now that I see it, I'm like, it's probably a smart move. But he had a lot of issues himself that he had to work on.
Life was hard. He did not have easy things happen to him.
No, he had some very poor things happen to him, and I feel for him in that.
So your friendship with him was still intact when you came out of rehab?
It was, but came to the realization that people are in your lives for certain seasons for certain reasons. It was hard because I had to pretty much disassociate myself from all of my ties in the past before I went into the rehab, and he was the last one. I tried to hold on to that as long as I could, but I realized it was not healthy. So I had
too much history, and a lot of it was associated with not great things.
Yeah, it's just not good things, and I don't want to dive too much into that. But the short version of it is me and him are no longer close, and we're no longer on a talking basis. And he's got his life, I've got mine,
and that's okay.
I
think that was a big turning point for you. With a couple of different relationships is realizing that they can be for a season. Mm-hmm. And that's okay. It doesn't necessarily have to be for life, and it doesn't mean it was a failure if it wasn't for life.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big thing, was realizing that. it's okay to have seasons of different friendships, that are there. And
we all have our own shit, with our parents, with our kids. It's like now we're going to be going back to visit my sister that's alive, obviously, and her family, and some of your family, and
some friends,
and some friends and stuff like that.
Your dad.
But yeah, I'm actually taking my son out there to meet his father, or his grandfather, my father, for the first time.
Yeah.
And a lot of that reasoning is I want my grandson to be able to have a picture with his granddad before he goes.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my relationship with him is. I know he's going to want to talk a little bit, but he's not a very talkative person, so it's kind of like pulling teeth.
Depends on the subject.
Yeah. So I don't know. There's probably a lot of stuff that my body or my mind is blocking out for traumatic, for protection.
So you'd asked me last week, what were some of the good memories, or what are some positive takeaways you had from your childhood?
Positive takeaways, I would say, we used to do beach trips to California, and I remember we'd always get Taco Bell tacos and just go sit on the beach as soon as we got there. That was always a memory that I always remembered and I appreciated. I would always go boogie boarding with my sisters.
So they helped establish a love for the beach and travel.
Absolutely. We went to Beaver Creek, Colorado, and me and Vanessa, my middle sister who has passed, took our rollerblades, and we would rollerblade throughout all the, my oldest sister wasn't very athletic, so me and Vanessa were. So we would rollerblade throughout the community and do all this stuff, and we always had a good time as the three of us when we were younger.
I was going to say, do you feel like because your parents left you guys alone a lot that
we relied on each other?
Yeah, and it fostered this environment of good times and bad, you guys were with each other.
Yeah, and I feel like even as I got older, every time the three of us got together, we had a good time.
Yeah.
We always had fun, and we always laughed, and it was always good, But obviously those things come to an end too, so, but.
What is something from your childhood growing up that you have taken away and you want to implement in our house?
Oh, yeah. I was getting after you because we didn't have any fall decorations out. Because that was one thing.
Inside the house.
Yeah, inside the house. That was one thing that my mother was pretty good about, is during the holidays, she would always decorate, and it always kind of, the home at least, we live in Arizona. It's not very seasonal.
We don't get snow?
It's not, you don't feel like it's holidays around here. But that was one thing that my mom was always pretty good about, is she would always make the house feel like the holidays and like the seasons were changing. So that was something that we decided to go to Hobby Lobby and over the weekend, last weekend, and we put together some decorations for our house to make it feel like the holidays. So I think that was one thing that
you took it away as something that you want to continue with your family.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't, this is a pretty sad story, but it wasn't all bad. I mean, I learned a lot and had a lot of experiences, and trust me, there was a lot of good experiences too. A lot of good travel moments, a lot of good laughs, a lot of good times with my sisters, and I'm sure I had good times with my mom, and I'm sure I had pretty good times with my dad. Me and my dad traveled to Utah and went quadding and went up in the mountains, and he did the best he could, and that's all I can really ask of him, and I appreciate that he did that. At least he was there, he didn't run off, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's kind of who, my childhood and where I come from.
Are you excited to delve into
us?
The story of us next week?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting as well. We've definitely had our ups and downs, for sure.
We've done some non-conventional things.
Relationship things, yeah, for sure.
Even our first date was different than any first date I'd ever been on.
Yeah.
Excited to talk about it next week.
Well, guys, I appreciate you tuning in and listening to my sob story. But I'm okay. If anybody has any questions about that, I'm good.
It was good insight into
Who we are,
where
we come from,
why we make choices that we make as parents, and how we choose to interact with people in our lives based on how we were raised.
Yeah.
Tune in next week, learn about us.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You can check us out at
FreezeYourMilk.com
or Instagram.
Freeze Your Milk Podcast.
Until next week, guys. Thanks.
Don't forget, parenting is a trip. We are all here on the journey with you together. Thanks so much for listening.